Author chat. LaRae just came out with a great book, Mental Toughness for Women Leaders, and I'm also joined. So here's LaRae.
It's nice to meet you. Thank you, Lynn, for inviting me.
You're welcome. And we also have on our panel today Angela Clack. Hey, Angela.
Hi. My picture froze again, but I'm here.
Okay, she'll be joining the convo. So, so LaRae, tell me, you have a great background. I love your story. You were working in a high-end boutique type department store, from what I understand, as a fashion buyer.
I was. It was my first job out of college, and I just knew that that was not the path I wanted to take going forward. I understand there's a lot. I think for me, I just thought, oh, this will be a really glamorous sort of career. I'll be in retail, and I'll be able to, buy all sorts of fun clothes. And I love all that stuff. But it didn't take me long to figure out as a buyer, it's more about the number crunching.
Yeah.
And an accountant, and that wasn't me. So I looked for something different and interviewed at a lot of different places. And I decided to go back and get my master's at Arizona State University, and FBI was on campus, and I thought, well, why not? Why not just interview? And it just happened like that. It was just meant to be.
And what year was this?
This was 1983.
So how many female FBI agents were there in 1983?
There weren't that many.
Yeah.
My training class had 40 people, and I believe there were like 6 women. And so my first assignment, frequently, in fact, only until recently, were there other females on my squad. For the most part, I was the only female. And I think I didn't even have any female supervisors. So it is still a male-dominated environment, sort of a paramilitary kind of mindset, and I suppose it doesn't attract a lot of women for whatever reason. I'm not quite sure why, but it was a tremendous career, and I loved it, and I would recommend it for any woman who wants a career that's exciting and challenging.
So what inspired you to write the book? To really focus on how you can help women with all the lessons you've learned about leadership, mental toughness for women leaders. And I love the cover of the catalog. Of course, I have the ebook
Yes,
on my Kindle.
thank you.
I don't know if you
Perfect.
can
I
see it
know
with the
it's
lighting. So
and
what
I love
inspired you?
well, what inspired me to write the book really was in talking to people, and my audiences are varied. They can be men and women, but I was always asked the question, how did you survive in a male-dominated environment? And I think a lot of women leaders today, a lot of women, I mean, whether they consider themselves in an actual leadership position or somebody who is just heading up the household or is just out there on their own in some way trying to make a living, they are leading. If nothing else, they're leading their own life. And so I thought, this is an opportunity to really focus on how women can succeed utilizing their sex, and not in spite of it. How to be stronger as women by just being stronger as people. And so that's sort of what was the genesis behind. And I use a lot of neuroscience to this. The book you just raised is an interactive ebook, and I thought that because since I do use a lot of neuroscience to talk about how to develop mental toughness, I wanted readers to be able to go back to the original science behind some of this, the assertions I make, the statements I make about ways you can bulletproof your brain, ways that you can, juggle things in your life, whether you've got, home, work, family, whatever, that are really science-based rather than just somebody talking.
So, Angela, I'm going to let you chime in here. Angela is a PhD. She also has a pretty extensive background in women's empowerment. So, Angela, what were some of your takeaways of the book, or what questions do you have for LaRae?
Actually, I do have a question. When you talked about the backdrop for your book being a neuroscience, can you talk a little bit about that in terms of, I'm guessing the gender differences in brain, or tell me a little bit about how you incorporated the neuroscience.
Absolutely, because when I talk about mental toughness, it's really changing the way your brain functions, and so that it says yes to an obstacle or adversity or a tough situation instead of backing away and saying, I can't do that. And when we look at the neuroscience behind that, and scientists and researchers are able to see how our reaction to a problem or a situation in our life affects our brain. So, for example, we have a negativity bias, Angela, that goes back to the caveman because we were taught to get lunch, not eat lunch back in the day. And so there is this when we see negative information or something comes to us where it threatens us in some way, our first reaction is no, because that's how the limbic brain, the limbic brain system is how it's evolved. Because negative information has always been more of a threat to our safety than positive. So positive information is something, hey, this is good news, this can help us, this is great. But we get a negative, or we perceive something as negative, and we go into survival mode. And so mental toughness is, first of all, recognizing what happens, and second of all, being able to step back and say, okay, I am going to control this, rather than letting this reaction control my response. And so, just, I don't want to get into this a lot unless you want me to go further, but it's really, really important to moderate our thinking and our thoughts when we're confronted with tough times or tough circumstances, so that we can look for the positive rather than just, letting the negative reaction take over.
I no, that's fine. You don't have to go deep into the brain. That's good. I like the fact that there's science behind what you're writing about. I kind of like that because I guess again because of my background in psychology. But the other part I really liked about your book is of how you define self-awareness and what it is and what it isn't. Because I think that's not something that everybody is well versed in understanding what it is. I think people have confused self-awareness with self-esteem and other self-words. So, can you talk a little bit about that, about how you came to define self-awareness?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of my FBI training came into play there. Because when you talk about self-awareness, it is equally important to understand and accept and know your weaknesses as well as embrace your strengths. Because if you don't, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you may not end up on top. And particularly in a situation with an arrest or even pulling your gun or an interview, interrogation, you do not want that to happen. And so it was an exercise in brutal honesty, in looking at ourselves and identifying where our strengths were, also where our what our weaknesses were when confronted with the unknown. And the key there in self-awareness is not to give up and say, oh, okay, that's fine, that's all I can do, this is my limitation, I can't go beyond that. Just the opposite. You know where your growing edge is. And so we're always working towards peak performance. And when you do that, you really do need to push up against that, that threshold, and understand that, hey, look, this is where I'm going, and this is how I'm going to work, toward changing that, and recognizing what you can't change. Some things you just can't change, and you have to be comfortable with that. deal with that and manage your weakness, but grow your strength.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And I know in the book you really say that your weakness was perceived that you were a woman, right? Because it was male dominated, and you knew you weren't gonna get the great assignments because these were going to all the men, and so you took that perceived weakness, and it sounds like you basically created a whole. You basically pitched that that was your strength. That was that you were woman, and that's why they needed to send you to Russia to, find the spies because nobody would, question you as a woman. They wouldn't think that you were there for the FBI.
That's really true, Lynn. And getting back to Angela's question a little bit about self-awareness, also part of that is putting aside ego. And good, deep levels of self-awareness require that you put aside ego. And I bring this up because, as you point out, Lynn, when I was so marginalized on my squad, one of the first squads I was on, actually, the first couple of years in my career, I was just marginalized and put to the side. And I got what I call the dog's breakfast of, cases. It was whatever was left over. And it became very clear to me, and I was working counterintelligence and espionage. And it was very obvious to me at that point, I was never going to get a real intelligence officer assigned to me, because it always went to the senior agents who were, guess what, guys. And so I just said, that's fine. And I just sort of decided I would approach it on my own. And so I just went up, sat down at my desk, and decided, okay, what strengths do I have? One of them is I'm very non-threatening. I don't look like an FBI agent. I mean, a real one. You see the dollies, whatever, show up in movies, but most agents don't look like them. They're guys. They're bulked up. I mean, that's how we get through the academy. It's a pretty strenuous, physical requirement in firearms. And so I get out there, and I love fashion, and I worked as a buyer, and I had this background that was not consistent because I had no law enforcement background. So, which was to my benefit. It was to my benefit. And so I could walk up to, and at this point, I was working both Chinese and Russian, primarily Russian. Walk up to them. They had no inkling that I was an actual agent. Maybe I was a source. They didn't know, but they never thought I was an agent. So they treated me as a threat. And again, we get back to that threat thing we were talking about earlier. So they let down their guard, and that was a tremendous benefit for me. And people would talk to me, whereas they wouldn't talk to some, guy that looked like he could take them down, 250 pounds, all muscle. And I just wasn't as threatening, and it was very effective.
That was your secret, right? You're like,
That was a secret ingredient, absolutely. And I think, too, as you talk about mental toughness, just talking about really having the ability to set aside the ego and who you think you are, who you think you should be, or what you should look like, and accept and identify. And that's the really big thing. We all have tremendous talents, skills, and abilities. But it's incumbent upon each of us to identify what they are, rather than waiting for somebody else to tell us what they are. Because they may or may not be accurate. And so it's really having the confidence. And this is when I talk to women, confidence and these self-limiting barriers, that really upsets me, that they lack the confidence that they do to go out there and break through their own barriers, these self-limiting barriers. So that was another reason of the book. I just felt like that's ridiculous. Somebody really need to speak to that.
I totally agree. And Angela, as well. I know we're all on the same page with that one, right, Angela?
Yeah, definitely.
So I have a question for you. Chapter 6, you talk about yes is the most dangerous word in the world. So tell me a little bit more about that.
And I got a lot of flack from that because, you can, when I say flack, 'cause I wrote this as a blog initially, and I got, some responses, and basically, I think the wimps of the world think that means I have to be a yes person. But no, no, that means you have to be the person who is willing to step forward and accept those challenges that are before you, and not blame somebody else. Take responsibility, but walk up and say. And again, when you say yes and you mean it, and it's not in a wimpy way. I'm not talking about, go get the coffee. Oh yes, whatever, or take this lower position because whatever, we think that you don't really need to be promoted or capable, and you say, oh yes. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when you are confronted with an obstacle or a situation where, oh, what's going to happen now? When you say yes, that actually changes some of the ways your brain thinks. And these frontal lobes, it actually changes the brain waves, and it changes so that you are think more positively about yourself and about your situation. And when you get down to really the nugget of what mental toughness is, it's saying, you know what? Yes, I can. Because I got to say, quit is the only four-letter word I never heard in my 24 years in the FBI. You just you don't give up. You don't look a parent in the eye who has had their child gone missing or kidnapped and say, I can't.
Mm.
You don't do that. You find a way. And I've been involved in some child kidnappings, and we did get those kids back. I mean, there is nothing. You do not say, I can't. I give up. Say, yes, I can.
So no is not an option.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Not, and it should never be an option for you and I, Lynn, for what we want. And I'm not talking about selfishness here. I'm talking about you're in an environment where somebody's saying you can't do that, or you're not qualified. I mean, or next time you need to have the confidence to be able to say, yes, I can do that job, or move to that next level, or accept this challenge, or move through this barrier. And it does begin with your attitude towards yourself, having the confidence in yourself that you can do that.
So a lot of it is mindset, right? Getting in our head. Angela, is there any other questions you had or any other insights from the book you'd like to share?
Question in terms of I'm, I agree with you where there's some kind of frustration sometimes with people who don't perceive that they can do something, particularly women. How have you addressed or helped women who say they can't? What do you do to push them past their comfort zone to believe that they can when everything they see around them tells them that they can't?
Mm.
So that's an excellent, excellent question, and thank you so much for asking it. The answer is a bit uncomfortable, but yet it's important. And this is what I recommend to women: is this: always push yourself to the point of failure, because failure has so much to teach you. And I'm going to give you an example. And when I say failure, I just mean not difference between defeat and failure. Because your reaction when something doesn't work for you, when and and you think, okay, hey, can I do this? Your confidence wavers only because you're comfortable with what that feels like. Can you land on your feet and say, hey, you know what? I've been here before. This is what I learned from it, rather than shirking away and saying, I can't do that. I can't do that. You say, I have been there before, and this is what I learned about it, and this is how I'm going to go forward next time. And I tell you, the biggest failure I had was the FBI Academy. And as I mentioned before, most of the agents, and most of them are guys, were all either previously in some type of law enforcement or military, a lot of military guys. And then the third group would be like the lawyers and the accountants, but they were all buff or they wouldn't have been there. I had a really hard time with push-ups. I just am not athletic, and that's just a fact. And I'm not going to try to pretend otherwise, but that doesn't mean I couldn't get through the physical fitness part. It was difficult. That's not a problem. I'm doing my push-ups. It's the interim fit test. But my coach knew I had problems with the push-ups. So he was the one who counted them, not one of his assistants. It was him. Wanted to make sure he knew he was watching. So I get to like the 9th push-up, and I mean, you've got to break the plane, you've got to go down, your nose touches, whatever, and he just kept counting 9, 9, 9 to indicate he was not counting that 9th push-up. And I had to do the 9th push-up something like 9 times, and all the while I'm thinking, I'm not going to make it because I wasted all my energy on this 9th push-up. Eventually started counting them again. I did fail that test. I failed the interim physical fitness test. And it did mean that my career as an FBI agent was at risk. But I have to tell you, I learned more from that failure than any other. It taught me right there about mental toughness. Was I going to lie down and accept failure? If I did, that meant I wouldn't be pursuing the career that I knew I really wanted, or was I going to like buck up and do something about it? And so I did, and I realized no matter what it took, I had to keep working at it and working out more than anybody else. And I could have said, it's not fair, nobody else has done it at the gym, but I didn't. I just said, I will do what I need to do in order to pass this test. And so I just think failure can teach us a lot about not only what we really want, but also about how we keep going back and we keep moving forward. Even if it's hard to measure at times, measure it. And we see progress, and you keep moving forward. So, what do I say about failure to women or look for failure. Don't wait until something is really important to you. Learn how you deal with failure. Have a little petri dish in your life. A little something where you don't know if you're learning something new. So your threshold of failure is actually fairly high because you're learning something new. So that you understand yourself, getting right back to self-awareness. You understand yourself well enough that you know how you're going to react, and you know how to push yourself.
That is great advice. I totally agree. Failure is a blessing. And I think a lot of people think you fail or succeed, and they're actually, you can't have one without the other, right? They're related. We're constantly doing both. I know I'm going to continue to succeed and continue to fail many times over. So,
it's like, if you have enough disadvantages, you lead to massive success.
yeah, yeah. It's so true. I tell people the only reason I'm still here is because I failed more times than other people, but I kept going. That is the difference. Angela, anything else you'd like to share or ask?
No, thank you so much for allowing me to ask the questions that I did.
You're welcome.
But
I do have one more question for LaRae because we don't want to keep her too long. But in section 4, you talk about predicting your success and beating the odds. So, I deal with a lot of women entrepreneurs, training and developing, and it's everything you talked about. Failure is a big reason women give up, lack of confidence, lack of belief. There's also a lot of self-sabotage going on, not really going all in on the dream because of a fear of failure or success. So, how do you beat the odds?
I love that chapter, that whole section, because I'm a firm believer that we do make our own luck.
Yeah.
And I do understand that things happen that you don't expect, then you're thinking, hey, that's great. But by and large, we make our own luck. And in my opinion, and also I think when you look at other people and how other people have succeeded, not just famous people. I'm so tired of hearing about famous people who have succeeded. I want to know about real people. People who, like you and I, who have been in situations where they weren't sure. But the key, and I'll just throw this in as well, is always looking for opportunities. Instead of waiting for opportunities to come to you because you feel like, oh, well, somebody else recognized my talent, and until somebody does, I'm just going to wait this out. That's not the right attitude. And I'm not talking about being pushy and aggressive. Nobody likes somebody who's incompetent and unqualified to keep pushing forward. But once you understand what it takes, get to that next level, it's incumbent upon you to educate yourself, train yourself, prepare yourself to make your own luck. Because when an opportunity presents itself, you have to be ready. And so again, it's kind of being kind of in a constant state of preparedness and not becoming complacent with where we are or who we are or our talents. And actually, when you start talking about peak performance, and again, a lot of researchers, all documented in my book, gone back to the original research. But when you really look at it, it has to be about 4%. Your effort, that tension between ability and goal should be about 4%. Anything more than that is going to dishearten you. Anything less than that is not really going to push you or stretch you. So always remember that when it comes to identifying opportunities or making never losing sight of that goal, that vision that you have for yourself. So it's a constant state of maintenance. You take your car in, it's maintenance, and that's what we need to do for ourselves, both intellectually, physically, spiritually, wherever your life leads you. We need to be constantly pushing ourselves. And I'm not saying exhausting, but I'm just saying in a way that keeps us alert, keeps us prepared for when that opportunity does present itself, so you can grab it.
So kind of get out of our bubble, hang out with those people that will lift us up and maybe are even at a higher place than we are so that we can get a little of that energy, attend conferences, training seminars, workshops, all those things that we need to do to continue to learn and grow really throughout our whole life.
Oh, I agree, Lynn. And I tell you, the company you keep is essential. The company, and whether it's, you can't do anything about family. That's, what I'm saying. So choose your friends well. But surround yourself with people who believe in you, who know you, whom you trust. So when you get that feedback, it's honest. It's not based on jealousy. It's not based on the fact that you are pushing forward and they're not. Or and like you just said, Lynn, you identified it so well. Who will aspire you and encourage you, motivate you, and who haven't just settled in life. I don't think there's anything worse than, getting to a certain age where you realize I've just settled. I haven't reached my full potential. And what a sad, sad time that would be for anybody who finds themselves. And I think that's where a lot of old people get really bitter, because they realize maybe there was more they could have done or have taken on more. And maybe they would have failed. Maybe they wouldn't have, but they'll never know. And
Yeah.
that's sad. So I do think people that we associate with is essential if we want to be successful.
Well, I think that is the perfect closing words for our hangout tonight. So again, thank you, LaRae. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely, it was a joy to be here, and thank you, Lynn, for inviting me. And I'm excited about the women in your group here. I mean, good for them, and they're reaching out and developing ways, identifying ways that they can develop their potential and be mentally